I always knew my cousin was the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. I just never imagined that one day his golden touch would be the thing that destroyed the only dream I ever built for myself. It's funny you spend years of your life working towards a single moment, a single tangible symbol of your success. You picture it, you plan for it, you sacrifice for it. You tell yourself that all the late nights, all the missed birthdays, and all the cheap takeout meals will be worth it when you finally have that one thing in your hands. For me, that thing was a midnight blue Tesla Model S Plaid. It wasn't just metal glass and a battery. It was my freedom. It was my proof to myself and to a family that always saw me as the responsible, boring one, that I could achieve something spectacular on my own terms. And for a few glorious weeks, I was right. But what they don't tell you about dreams is how fragile they are and how quickly they can be turned into a nightmare by the people you're supposed to trust the most. My nightmare started with a phone call at 2 a.m. The sound pierced the silence of my apartment, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, my heart already starting to pound with that primal fear that only a call in the dead of night can inspire. It was an unknown number. My first thought was that something had happened to my parents. I answered, my voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" A calm, professional voice on the other end identified himself as an officer with the Raleigh Police Department. He asked if I was Chloe. I said yes, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. He didn't waste any time. He told me there had been an accident involving a vehicle registered in my name. He gave me the location and intersection just a few miles from my place. My mind went blank. An accident. That was impossible. My car was safe in its designated spot in the building's parking garage. I'd checked it myself before going to bed, a little ritual I had. But the officer was patient and he was firm. He said I needed to come down to the scene. I threw on the first clothes I could find, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip up my jacket. The drive felt like an eternity. Every traffic light seemed to mock me, holding me back. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the car was just stolen and involved in a fender bender. I could handle that. A stolen car was an insurance problem. It was impersonal. But deep down, a cold, sickening feeling was already starting to form in the pit of my stomach, a premonition that this was something far worse. When I arrived, the scene was exactly as horrifying as my deepest fears had imagined. Flashing blue and red lights painted the dark street in chaotic strokes. There, illuminated in the strobing lights, was my dream, my Tesla, or what was left of it. It was wrapped around a thick metal traffic light pole, the front end crumpled like a discarded piece of paper. The beautiful midnight blue paint was scarred with deep gashes. The passenger side was caved in, and one of the headlights was dangling from its socket like a defeated eye. The sleek, powerful machine that represented 3 years of my blood, sweat, and tears was now a mangled wreck. I felt the air leave my lungs in a painful gasp. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. And then I saw him, my cousin Kyle. He was standing off to the side, leaning casually against the side of a police car, as if he were waiting for a friend at the mall. He wasn't hurt. There wasn't a single scratch on him. He was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the screen, a look of bored indifference on his features. He was 24 years old, but in that moment he looked like a petulant teenager who had been mildly inconvenienced. He looked up and saw me, and a slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. It was a look I knew all too well. It was the look he always had right before my aunt and uncle swooped in to clean up his mess. I walked toward him, my legs feeling unsteady. A wave of pure, hot rage washed over me, eclipsing the grief I felt for my car. "Kyle," I said, my voice dangerously low, "what did you do?" He had the audacity to shrug, pushing himself off the police car. He didn't even look at the wreckage. He just looked at me, his eyes devoid of any remorse. "It's just a car, Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with the casual entitlement that had defined his entire life. "My parents will handle it." That was it. Those were the words that shattered what was left of my composure. It wasn't just a car. It was 3 years of my life. It was every double shift I picked up every weekend I spent working instead of going out with friends every dollar I meticulously saved. And to him, it was nothing more than a minor problem his parents would pay to make disappear. In that moment, standing on the cold pavement surrounded by the flashing lights and the wreckage of my dream, I knew this was more than an accident. This was a declaration of war, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to back down. The drive home was a special kind of torture. I was in a generic, soulless rental car that smelled of cheap plastic and air freshener. The seats were stiff, the engine whined when I accelerated, and every touch of the plastic steering wheel was a reminder of the smooth, responsive leather I was used to. The stark contrast between this pathetic little box on wheels and my beautiful broken Tesla was like a physical ache in my chest. This car wasn't a symbol of anything. It was just a temporary solution, a beige reminder of my new reality. As I drove through the empty streets of Raleigh, the flashing lights of the accident scene still burned behind my eyelids, and with every mile the ghost of my wrecked dream triggered other ghosts' memories I had tried to bury. They came back not as a gentle fog, but as sharp, painful flashes like pressing on old bruises, scars of the past. The image of Kyle's smirk brought me back 5 years to my final semester of college. I was in the university library surrounded by stacks of books fueled by caffeine and sheer panic as I typed my final thesis. My laptop was my lifeline. It held every piece of research, every footnote, every painstakingly written word. Kyle, who was visiting for the weekend, had sauntered in complaining of being bored. He'd plopped down next to me and with a careless wave of his hand knocked my full cup of coffee directly onto my keyboard. There was a sickening sizzle and then darkness. My lifeline was dead. His apology was a flippant, "Oops, my bad." But the real sting came later. When I told my Aunt Sharon what happened, hoping for some semblance of support, she just sighed. "Chloe, you shouldn't leave drinks so close to your electronics," she'd said. Then she turned to Kyle, who was pouting in the corner, and her voice became sweet as honey. "Poor baby, are you bored? Let's go to the mall and get you that new PlayStation." While he got a brand new gaming console as a reward for his carelessness, I had to pick up extra shifts at a local coffee shop, the smell of coffee now a bitter reminder of my loss, just to afford a replacement laptop to save my degree. The wail of a distant siren on the road pulled me from that memory and threw me into another one just 2 years ago. I got a frantic call from my mother. Kyle had been arrested for public disturbance after a drunken night out with his friends. There was no panic in my Uncle Rick's voice when we all talked later. There was only a smug satisfaction. He talked about his lawyer, a real shark, who made the whole thing disappear. Kyle's record was wiped clean before the ink was even dry. He never spent a night in jail, never paid a fine, never had to face a judge. He never faced a single consequence. It was just another mess that Daddy's money cleaned up. Back in the rental car, the pieces all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The wrecked Tesla wasn't an accident. It was an inevitability. It was the climax of 24 years of being told that actions don't have consequences, that his wants were more important than anyone else's needs or property. The smirk I saw tonight was the same smirk I saw when he ruined my thesis, the same smirk I imagined he had when his record was wiped clean. Tonight he hadn't just wrecked a car. He had taken years of my sacrifice and treated it with the same casual disdain he treated everything else in his life. And as I pulled into my apartment's parking garage, I made a silent vow. This time there would be no easy way out. This time the mess wouldn't just disappear. I spent the next day in a fog of anger and administrative tasks. I was on the phone for hours, first with the police, then with my insurance company, repeating the same soul-crushing story over and over again. My Tesla Model S Plaid was wrecked. My cousin Kyle took it without permission. No, he was not on my insurance policy. Yes, I wanted to press charges for unauthorized use. Each word felt like a small betrayal of the family I was supposed to be a part of, but a necessary step in defending the life I had built for myself. I was just getting off a particularly draining call when my apartment buzzer rang a harsh, demanding sound. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my stomach dropped. It was my Aunt Sharon and Uncle Rick. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. They just showed up standing there on my doorstep with expressions of deep theatrical concern etched onto their faces. It was a classic move, the ambush disguised as a wellness check. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Aunt Sharon swept past me into my living room, her eyes scanning my apartment as if she were looking for signs of a breakdown. "Oh, Chloe, honey," she began, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "We were so worried about you. We came as soon as we heard." Uncle Rick followed her in his presence, filling the small space. He was holding an envelope in his hand. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "This is a terrible situation, Chloe," he said, his tone that of a CEO handling an unfortunate but minor business expense. "A real mess." I closed the door, a feeling of cold dread settling over me. They weren't here to apologize on Kyle's behalf. They were here as his cleanup crew, his damage control. "A mess," I repeated, my voice tight. "Rick, he stole my car and destroyed it. That's a little more than a mess. It's a crime." Aunt Sharon immediately started dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd produced from her purse. "Don't use that word, Chloe. It's so ugly. Kyle is in a fragile state right now. He's beside himself with guilt. He made a mistake, a stupid, youthful mistake. Are you really going to ruin his entire future over a material object?" I stared at her dumbfounded. A youthful mistake. Kyle was 24 years old. "Aunt Sharon," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "This isn't about the car anymore. It's about the fact that he felt entitled enough to take it and the complete lack of remorse he showed after he wrecked it. He needs to learn that his actions have consequences." That's when Uncle Rick stepped forward, extending the envelope he was holding. "We understand that," he said smoothly, "and we are prepared to handle the consequences. Here." He pushed the envelope into my hand. "There's $5,000 in there. That should be more than enough to cover your deductible and any initial repairs. Let's just put this whole ugly business behind us, for the family." I looked down at the envelope in my hand. $5,000. It was an insult. A pathetic attempt to buy my silence and sweep a felony under the rug. It was a fraction of the car's value, and it completely ignored the violation, the disrespect, the sheer arrogance of what Kyle had done. I didn't open it. I just held it between my thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. "This isn't about money, Rick," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "This isn't a business transaction you can just write a check for. Your son committed a crime. He destroyed something I worked for years to achieve, and you think you can just pay me off to make it go away." Aunt Sharon's fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a look of indignation. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for this family, we are trying to be reasonable, and you are being selfish. Kyle is your blood. Is a car really more important to you than your own cousin? My cousin didn't seem to think our blood was very important when he was stealing my keys and joyriding in my car." I shot back, my patience completely gone. "You're not here to be reasonable. You're here to protect him just like you always do, but I'm not playing along this time." I walked over to the door and opened it. I held the envelope out to Uncle Rick. "Take your money," I said, my voice cold as ice, "and tell your son I'll see him in court." His face hardened. The mask of the concerned uncle was gone, replaced by the ruthless businessman. "You'll regret this, Chloe," he said, snatching the envelope from my hand. "Family is supposed to support each other, not tear each other down." "Then maybe you should have taught your son what that means," I said, and closed the door on their shocked faces. After I closed the door on my aunt and uncle, I stood there for a long time, leaning against it, my heart hammering in my chest. The silence of my apartment felt immense. For a moment, their angry, accusatory words echoed in the quiet space. "Selfish. You're tearing the family apart." Had I been too harsh? Was I really destroying my family over a car? The doubt they had so expertly planted began to sprout a poisonous little weed in my mind. They had twisted the narrative so effectively that I, the victim, was starting to feel like the villain. My anger was still there, a hot coil in my gut, but it was now tangled with a confusing knot of guilt and uncertainty. I felt isolated, adrift in a sea of my own fury and their manipulation. I needed an anchor. I needed a voice of reason. During my lunch break the next day, I sat in my car in the office parking lot and called my best friend Olivia. We had been friends since college, and she was the one person who had witnessed the full history of my family's dysfunctional dynamics from a safe distance. She picked up on the second ring, her cheerful, "Hey you," a stark contrast to the turmoil I was feeling. The moment I heard her voice, the dam broke. The words came tumbling out of me in a frantic, angry rush. I told her everything. The 2 a.m. phone call, the mangled wreck of my Tesla Kyle's smug indifference, and the calculated ambush by Aunt Sharon and Uncle Rick. I told her about the envelope with its insulting offer of $5,000. And then they called me selfish. I finished, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and hurt. They said I was destroying the family. Liv, am I crazy? Am I making too big a deal out of this? He's my cousin. It's just a car, right? Maybe I should just take the money and let it go. Maybe that's what a good family member would do. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Olivia processing the sheer audacity of it all. When she finally spoke, her voice was not soft and sympathetic. It was sharp and clear, like a surgeon's scalpel cutting straight through my confusion. "Chloe, stop," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Stop right there. Do not let them do this to you. Do not let them make you question your own sanity. Are you making too big a deal out of this? Absolutely not. They ambushed you in your own home to bully you into silence after their son committed a felony. That's not family, that's a mob shakedown." I let out a shaky breath. She wasn't telling me what I wanted to hear. She was telling me what I needed to hear. "And let me tell you something else," she continued, her voice gaining intensity. "They are not worried about Kyle's future. They have never been worried about his future. If they were, they would have taught him about consequences years ago. No, they are terrified of something else entirely. They are terrified because for the first time in his pampered, protected life, they can't control the outcome. They can't just write a check and make a police report disappear. They're not worried about him. They're panicked about their loss of power." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking all the doubt and guilt right out of me. She was right. This wasn't about concern. It was about control. "This is a test, Chloe," Olivia said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its firmness. "This moment right now is a defining one. This was never just about a car. It's about respect. It's about whether you are going to let them treat you like a doormat for the rest of your life. Because if you do not draw the line right here, right now, they will continue to walk all over you forever. Every single time. You know I'm right." I closed my eyes, and a single tear traced a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness or confusion. It was a tear of relief. The fog in my mind had lifted, burned away by the clarity of her words. I knew what I had to do. My resolve, which had been wavering, now solidified into something hard and unbreakable. "You're right," I said, my voice no longer trembling. It was steady. It was firm. "Thank you, Liv. I really needed to hear that." "I know," she said. "Now go be the bada. I know you are." We said our goodbyes and I ended the call. I sat in my car for another minute, the quiet no longer feeling oppressive. It felt peaceful. The battle was far from over, but the war inside my own head had just been won. The morning after my call with Olivia, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't had since before the accident. Clarity. The fog of guilt and confusion had completely lifted, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. My aunt and uncle had tried to manipulate me with a twisted definition of family, one that demanded my silence in exchange for their approval. But Olivia's words had reminded me that true family doesn't ask you to sacrifice your self-respect. Armed with that conviction, I knew exactly what I had to do. My first stop was the Raleigh Police Department. The building was just as impersonal and bureaucratic as you'd imagine. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. But I wasn't intimidated. I was focused. When my name was finally called, I walked up to the counter and spoke to a tired-looking officer. I calmly explained that I needed a copy of the accident report and that I wanted to add an official statement to the file. He looked at me. His expression weary, as if he was preparing for another messy. She said family drama. But my demeanor wasn't hysterical or emotional. It was all business. I handed him my identification and the case number. While he retrieved the report, I took out my phone. "Officer," I said, my voice steady, "I also have evidence that I believe is crucial to the case." I showed him the text message exchange between me and Kyle from the night of the accident. There it was in black and white with a timestamp. Kyle's message, "Hey, can I borrow the Tesla tonight? Want to impress someone." And my response sent just moments later, "Absolutely not, Kyle. You are not on my insurance, and it's not a toy. Please do not ask again." The officer's expression shifted. His weariness was replaced by a flicker of professional interest. This was no longer a gray area. This was clear-cut. He took my phone and had another officer officially photograph the screen for the evidence file. He then took my formal statement where I detailed how Kyle had taken my spare key from the key bowl near my door without my knowledge or permission. As I signed the statement, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was no longer just my word against his. It was now a documented fact in a police file. My first move was complete. My next call was even more important. I walked out of the police station and sat in my rental car. I took a deep breath and I dialed my insurance company. A friendly agent named Brenda answered. I explained the situation from the initial phone call to the scene of the accident. I told her the vehicle was a total loss. I gave her the police report number and informed her that I had provided evidence to the police proving the car was taken without my consent. And then I used the two words that would change everything. "I need to be very clear," I said, my voice firm. "I am officially filing this claim as a case of unauthorized use." Brenda was quiet for a moment, the sound of her typing in the background. "Okay, Chloe," she said, her tone shifting to one of serious professionalism. "Thank you for being so clear. Given the police report and your statement, we can definitely proceed under that classification. I need to explain what that means for you and for the other party involved." "Please do," I said. First, she began. "Because this is a case of unauthorized use, essentially a theft, you are not considered at fault in any way. We will process your claim for the full assessed value of your 2025 Tesla Model S Plaid. We will wire the funds directly to your account once the assessment is complete, usually within a few business days. From a financial standpoint, you will be made whole." I felt a surge of relief, but I knew that was only half the battle. "And what about Kyle?" I asked. "Well," Brenda said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "That's the second part of the process. Once we have paid out your claim, our legal department initiates a process called subrogation. Have you heard of that term?" "No, I haven't," I admitted. Subrogation is the legal right of an insurance company to pursue a third party that caused a loss to the insured. In simple terms, Chloe, it means that we pay for your damages now, and then we legally go after the person responsible to get that money back. We take on the fight for you. Our legal team will contact your cousin Kyle and his guardians since he lives with them and hold them financially responsible for the entire amount we paid you, plus any associated legal fees." I was speechless for a second. "So you're saying you're going to sue him?" "Our legal department will use all available means to recover the funds," Brenda clarified. "This will become a formal legal and financial debt under his name. This isn't like a family loan, Chloe. This is a corporate legal action. It can affect his ability to get credit. His driver's license could be suspended by the state until the debt is settled, and it will follow him for years. I need you to understand that by filing this claim as unauthorized use, you are setting a very serious and unstoppable process in motion." "Are you sure that is what you want to do?" I thought of Kyle's smirk. I thought of my aunt and uncle's insulting offer. I thought of all the years they had protected him from the consequences of his own actions. They had left me no choice. They had built this system, and now I was going to use a different, more powerful system to tear it down. "Yes, Brenda," I said, my voice filled with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. "I am absolutely sure." For a few days, a deceptive calm settled over my life. The wire transfer from the insurance company appeared in my bank account, a substantial, tangible number that felt like a validation of my decision. It didn't replace the feeling of pride I had for my Tesla, But it was a form of justice. It was a clear sign that the system at least was on my side. I had started the process of car shopping online, trying to get excited about a new beginning. I was actively avoiding calls from my parents, knowing they would only try to mediate a peace I had no interest in negotiating. I felt like I had taken control. I had drawn my line in the sand, set the wheels of consequence in motion, and now all I had to do was wait for the system to run its course. I was naive to think it would be that simple. The counterattack came not from my family, but from an entirely unexpected direction. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, nestled in my mailbox between a credit card offer and a coupon booklet. It was a crisp, official-looking envelope with a return address that made my stomach clench: the City of Raleigh Department of Public Works. It felt heavy in my hand, far heavier than a single piece of paper should. I carried it up to my apartment, a sense of foreboding creeping over me, undoing all the fragile peace I had managed to build. I sat at my kitchen table and slit the envelope open with a butter knife. The letterhead was stark and official. The text was dense with legal jargon, but the message was brutally clear. It was a formal notice of liability. The traffic light pole that my Tesla had been wrapped around was in fact city property. The letter included a detailed invoice itemizing the cost removal of the damaged pole, the purchase of a new state-of-the-art signal pole, the labor costs for the installation crew, and even the cost of the electricity to power the temporary stop signs at the intersection. The grand total was $7,500. I read the number again, feeling the blood drain from my face. $7,500. But the next paragraph was the one that truly stole my breath. It stated that as the registered owner of the vehicle responsible for the destruction of public property, I, Chloe, was legally liable for the full amount. The letter concluded with a chillingly polite ultimatum: payment was due in full within 30 days. If the payment was not received by the deadline, the City of Raleigh would commence civil litigation against me to recover the debt, along with all associated court costs and legal fees. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. This couldn't be right. I was the victim. My car was stolen. How could I be held responsible for the damage Kyle had caused? I reread the letter, my hands shaking. There were no loopholes, no mentions of extenuating circumstances. To the city, it was simple math. My car destroyed their property, therefore I owed them money. The sense of control I had felt just hours before evaporated, replaced by a rising tide of panic. My insurance payout was for my car. It didn't cover third-party property damage in a case of unauthorized use. That liability fell squarely on the driver. But the city wasn't going after the driver. They were coming after me, the owner. It was a brilliant, cruel piece of bureaucratic efficiency. It was easier for them to hold the insured owner accountable than to chase down an uninsured, irresponsible 24-year-old. Suddenly, the conflict had expanded beyond the borders of my family. This was no longer a private war between me and the people who were supposed to love me. It had spilled out into the real world, and now I was facing a new, faceless enemy, a city government with unlimited legal resources. The 30-day deadline felt like a ticking time bomb strapped to my chest. This debt, this lawsuit could tarnish my credit, drain my savings, and create a public record of legal trouble that could follow me for years. Kyle hadn't just wrecked my car. He had thrown a grenade into the middle of my carefully constructed life, and I was the one left scrambling to deal with the shrapnel. The anger returned with a vengeance hot and clarifying, burning away my panic. This was their fault, all of it. Kyle's recklessness, my aunt and uncle's deliberate, lifelong campaign of enabling him. They had created this monster, and now I was the one being sent the bill for his rampage. The $5,000 they had tried to shove into my hand now seemed even more pathetic, more insulting than before. It wouldn't have even covered this new unexpected debt. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Family dinner at our place on Sunday. Aunt Sharon and Uncle Rick will be there. And Kyle. It's time to talk this out and heal. Please, Chloe, be the bigger person." I looked at the text, then at the threatening letter on my table. Be the bigger person. The words were a mockery. They wanted me to absorb the cost, the blame, the consequences, all in the name of a hollow peace. They had no idea what they were asking. They had no idea the new threat that was hanging over my head. And as I stared at the demand for $7,500, I knew that the time for quiet, dignified action was over. Sunday dinner wasn't going to be a healing session. It was going to be a battlefield. And this time, I was coming armed. The moment I stepped into my parents' house that Sunday, the air felt thick with a suffocating manufactured peace. The smell of roasted chicken, usually a scent of comfort and home, now seemed like a cloying perfume meant to mask the stench of deceit. My mother Linda greeted me with a tight, anxious smile, her eyes pleading with me before I had even taken off my coat. My father David gave me a stiff, awkward hug, patting my back as if to say, "Just play along." It was clear this wasn't a dinner. It was a stage, and I was being cast in the role of the forgiving daughter. Aunt Sharon and Uncle Rick were already there, sitting in the living room like a king and queen holding court. And next to them on the edge of the sofa was Kyle. He was dressed in a collared shirt, his hair neatly combed. He looked like a chastened schoolboy, an image so utterly false it was almost comical. When he saw me, he stood up, his eyes darting toward his mother for a split second before landing on me. The small talk over appetizers was excruciating. We talked about the weather, about a neighbor's new puppy, about anything and everything that wasn't the giant gaping wound in the middle of our family. I remained mostly silent, offering one-word answers, my calmness a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from my parents. I was a coiled spring waiting for the right moment. Finally, as we sat down at the dinner table, my father cleared his throat, signaling the start of the main performance. "Chloe," he began, his voice heavy with false solemnity, "we're all here tonight because we love each other. And families have disagreements. Kyle has something he wants to say to you." All eyes turned to Kyle. He stood up, his hands clasped in front of him, and delivered a speech that was so obviously rehearsed, it felt like an insult. "Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with fake remorse, "I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I was reckless and stupid, and I never should have taken your car. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." He sat back down, looking to his parents for approval. Aunt Sharon beamed at him. "See, Chloe? He's sorry," she said, as if that one pathetic apology erased everything. I didn't respond to him. I didn't even look at him. Instead, I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out 2 folded documents. I placed them on the table in the space between the salt shaker and the gravy boat. The crisp sound of the paper hitting the polished wood cut through the room's tense silence. "What's this?" my mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm glad you're all here," I said, my voice calm and measured. "It gives me a chance to explain the full situation, since Kyle seems to have left out a few details in his apology." I unfolded the first document. "This is a copy of my insurance claim. As you can see, the total loss of the vehicle is valued at $85,000. Since the car was used without my authorization, the insurance company's legal team is now formally holding Kyle responsible for repaying that entire amount." Uncle Rick scoffed. "Our lawyers will handle that nonsense." "Perhaps," I said, and then I unfolded the second document. "But I'm not sure your lawyers can handle this." I slid the letter from the city of Raleigh to the center of the table. "This is a formal demand for payment from the city. The traffic pole Kyle destroyed was public property. The city is holding me as the car's owner personally liable for $7,500. Payment is due in 30 days, or they will sue me." A stunned silence fell over the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "They can't do that," Aunt Sharon shrieked, her mask of composure finally cracking. "They can, and they are," I said, my gaze sweeping across each of their faces. "So you see, this is no longer a simple family disagreement. Your son's youthful mistake has not only cost me my car, but it has now put my financial future and my legal standing at risk." The room erupted. My aunt and uncle launched into a furious defense of their son, accusing me of blowing things out of proportion, of trying to ruin him. My father pleaded with me to be reasonable, to retract the insurance claim. "Think of the family, Chloe," he begged. My mother was crying, whispering about how we were all falling apart. They weren't listening to me. They were all attacking me, the victim, for daring to hold the perpetrator accountable. Through it all, Kyle sat there silent, watching his parents fight his battle for him. But as the pressure mounted, as all the blame and anger in the room was directed at me, a familiar, ugly smirk began to form on his face. He felt safe, protected by the wall of his parents' denial. Cornered and furious, I looked directly at him. "Don't you have anything to say for yourself, Kyle?" He leaned back in his chair, his fake remorse replaced by pure, unfiltered arrogance. And then he said the words that would burn the final bridge between us to ash. "You're always showing off with that stupidly expensive car anyway." He sneered, his voice filled with a jealousy I now realized had been simmering for years. "Maybe this is a lesson in humility for you." That was it, the final, unforgivable insult. The room fell silent. Even his parents seemed shocked by the venom in his voice. But the truth was finally out. He wasn't sorry. He was glad. I slowly pushed my chair back from the table. I stood up, my movements deliberate. I looked at my mother and father, their faces a mixture of shock and shame. I looked at my aunt and uncle, their expressions of righteous anger now faltering. And then I looked at my cousin, the boy they had all ruined. "Thank you, Kyle," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You've finally made it perfectly clear." I dropped my napkin on the table. "I'm done, with all of you." I turned and walked out of the dining room, out of the house, and out of the family that had just proven it was no family at all. I had expected silence after walking out of that dinner. I had imagined my aunt and uncle would retreat to lick their wounds. My parents would wring their hands in anxious disapproval, and Kyle would be forced to finally sit with the consequences he had created. But I had underestimated the depths of his cowardice and the viciousness of his rage. When a cornered animal can't fight, it bites. Kyle, having been publicly humiliated and stripped of his parental protection for the first time, chose to bite me in the most public and poisonous way imaginable. He couldn't face me directly, so he turned to the coward's weapon of choice, the internet. The attack began the next morning. My phone started buzzing before I had even had my first cup of coffee. It was a cascade of notifications from Facebook and Twitter, a digital flood of tags and comments. My friend Olivia was the first to text me her message, a simple, ominous, "Don't look at social media right now, call me." Of course, that was the one thing that guaranteed I would look. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Kyle had written a long, rambling post, a carefully constructed narrative of lies and half-truths designed to paint him as the victim and me as a cruel, vindictive monster. He started with a tone of feigned heartbreak. "I never thought my own family would try to financially ruin me over a simple mistake," he wrote. "I made a terrible error in judgment, and I apologize from the bottom of my heart. But my cousin Chloe doesn't want an apology. She wants revenge. She's using her fancy job and her money to try and crush me." He twisted the entire story conveniently, leaving out the theft, the lies, and the threat of a lawsuit from the city. He portrayed the insurance claim not as a standard procedure, but as a malicious personal attack. He wrote about how I had always been competitive and jealous, how I had looked down on him for not having a high-powered corporate job like me. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, playing on every possible sympathy string. But it was the image he attached to the post that was the real declaration of war. It was a photo of me from my 16th birthday party nearly 12 years ago. In it, I am crying, my face streaked with mascara, my teenage self utterly heartbroken. It was a deeply personal, vulnerable moment. I had just been dumped by my first boyfriend, and my friends had gathered around to comfort me. It was a memory of teenage angst, but also of friendship and support. Kyle had taken that private moment and twisted it into something ugly and unrecognizable. His caption read, "This is who she really is. This was at a family birthday party. She always has to be the center of attention, even if it means ruining someone else's big day with her drama. Some things never change." He had made it seem like I was throwing a selfish tantrum, a spoiled brat demanding the spotlight. He had stolen a moment of my pain and put it on display for the entire world to mock. I felt a profound sense of violation, a sickness rising in my throat. This went far beyond a car. This was a deliberate attempt to assassinate my character, to humiliate me on the most personal level. But he wasn't finished. The final, most calculated blow was the tag. At the very end of his post, he had tagged the official corporate page of my employer, a major tech firm in the city. My heart stopped. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. He had crossed a sacred line, bringing his toxic drama directly to the doors of my professional life. My job as a software engineer was built on a reputation of being logical, calm under pressure, and a reliable team player. Kyle's post painted me as the exact opposite, unstable, vindictive, and prone to drama. In the tech world, that kind of reputation could be a career killer. My phone buzzed again. It was a Slack notification from a coworker. "Hey, is everything okay? I saw your cousin's post." The dread solidified into sheer panic. It was spreading. The carefully constructed wall between my messy family life and my professional identity had been breached and set on fire. I scrolled through the comments under his post. A few people who knew the real story were defending me, but they were drowned out by a chorus of my extended family and their friends, people who had only ever seen Kyle's charming facade. "Wow, Chloe, that's so cold. Family should come first. I can't believe she'd do that to poor Kyle." I felt trapped, publicly shamed, and utterly powerless. Kyle, in his rage, had managed to do what his parents' ambush could not. He had made me feel completely and totally alone. He hadn't just attacked my reputation. He had put a target on my livelihood. And as I sat there staring at the picture of my 16-year-old self, I realized this fight was no longer just about getting justice for my car. It was now a fight to save my name. For about an hour, I let myself feel the full, paralyzing weight of Kyle's attack. I watched the comments on his post multiply, a sickening mix of pity for him and judgment for me. My phone was a constant buzz of incoming messages. Olivia was furious, sending me a string of texts full of righteous anger and creative insults for Kyle. A few other close friends reached out, offering their support. But then came the messages that made my stomach churn, polite, cautious inquiries from my coworkers, and even one from my direct manager that simply said, "Let me know if you need to talk." The poison was spreading. The fire Kyle had started was threatening to burn down the professional reputation I had spent years building. My first instinct was to fight fire with fire. I wanted to comment on his post, to expose every single lie, to call him the pathetic, spoiled leech he was. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to match his emotional chaos with my own. But then I stopped. I thought about the calm, logical world of code I worked in every day. In that world, emotion didn't solve problems. Facts did. A messy public argument was exactly what Kyle wanted. It would make me look just as unhinged as him, validating his narrative that I was the one who loved drama. He had chosen the battlefield, but I would choose the weapons, and my weapons would be undeniable proof. With a newfound sense of cold purpose, I turned off my notifications and got to work. I didn't engage with a single comment. I didn't respond to any messages except to tell Olivia to trust me. Instead, I began to assemble my evidence like a lawyer preparing for trial. First, I went to my text messages. I scrolled back to that fateful night and took a clear, perfect screenshot of the conversation, Kyle's casual request to borrow my car and my firm, unambiguous refusal. The timestamp was a beautiful, indisputable fact. Next, I pulled out the official police report I had picked up. I didn't need to post the whole document, I just needed the official case number. It was a sterile, bureaucratic string of digits, but it was a powerful symbol. It told the world that this wasn't just a family squabble, it was a matter for the authorities. Finally, I took out the letter from the city of Raleigh. This was my trump card. I scanned it into my computer and opened it in an editing program. I carefully blacked out my personal information, my address, and any identifying account numbers. What was left was the official city letterhead, the demand for $7,500 for the destruction of public property, and the paragraph that held me the owner liable. It was a devastating piece of evidence that proved Kyle's mistake had serious real-world consequences that were now legally my problem. With my 3 pieces of evidence ready, I opened my own Facebook page. I started a new post. I didn't write a long emotional story. I didn't mention Kyle by name. I didn't address his lies or his pathetic photo. My response was the opposite of his. In every way, it was short, professional, and built on a foundation of cold, hard facts. I attached the 2 images, the screenshot of the text messages and the redacted letter from the city. My entire post consisted of only a few short lines. In response to recent speculation, I feel it is necessary to share some verifiable information. Fact 1. Permission to use my vehicle was explicitly denied. See attached screenshot. Fact 2. This incident is the subject of an official police investigation. The case number is 355-827. Fact 3. As a direct result of this incident, I am now being held personally liable by the city for damages to public property. See attached document. These are the facts. Thank you to everyone who has reached out with their concern. I read it over one last time. It was perfect. It was irrefutable. I took a deep breath and I hit post. For a moment there was silence. Then the reaction began. It started with a single like, then a wow emoji. The first comment simply said, "The receipts." Another one followed, "The police report number is a mic drop." The tide began to turn slowly at first, and then all at once. My post, with its calm professional tone and undeniable evidence, made Kyle's emotional rant look like the childish tantrum it was. People started tagging him in my post. The comments on his original post shifted from sympathy to skepticism. My coworkers started liking my post, a quiet professional show of support. Olivia commented with a single word, "Queen." The online court of public opinion, which had been so quick to judge me, was now rapidly reversing its verdict. My countermove had landed exactly as I had intended. My single fact-based post didn't just win a social media argument, it triggered an avalanche. The consequences for Kyle began to cascade one after another in a domino effect that was as swift as it was brutal. He had built his life on a foundation of his parents' money and a charming facade, and my simple presentation of the truth had just shattered both. The first domino to fall was his professional life. Kyle's client base wasn't made up of large, faceless corporations. He was a freelance graphic designer for small businesses, local startups, and real estate agents in the Raleigh area. These were people whose own success depended heavily on their reputation for professionalism and integrity. They couldn't afford to be associated with someone who was publicly airing their toxic family drama and demonstrating such a shocking lack of judgment. The emails started arriving in his inbox one by one. I can only imagine his growing panic as he read them. A local bakery whose logo he had designed wrote, "Kyle, in light of your recent public conduct, we feel it's best to terminate our ongoing contract for marketing materials." A tech startup he was doing branding for was even more direct. "Our company's values are built on trust and accountability. Your actions are not in alignment with those values, and we will be moving in a different direction." Each email was a nail in the coffin of the easy, flexible career his parents had bankrolled for him. The income he took for granted was drying up before his eyes. The second, much larger domino fell the following afternoon. It arrived at my aunt and uncle's house in a thick, intimidating envelope delivered by certified mail. It was from the legal department of my insurance company. Inside was not a friendly letter but a formal multi-page subrogation demand. It detailed in cold, unforgiving legal terms his liability for the full $85,000 value of the Tesla. It outlined the legal actions the company would take to collect the debt, including litigation wage garnishment and property liens. This wasn't a problem Uncle Rick's personal lawyer could fix with a friendly phone call. This was a corporate giant coming to collect its due, and they had a mountain of evidence to back them up. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Kyle's name. I let it ring for a moment, took a calming breath, and answered, putting the phone on speaker. I didn't say anything. For a few seconds, all I heard was his ragged breathing. Then the explosion came. "You are ruining my life," he screamed, his voice hoarse with rage. "My clients are dropping me. Everyone is calling me. This is all your fault. You and your stupid vindictive post." I remained silent, letting his fury crash against my calmness like waves against a rock. I was not going to engage. I was not going to argue. "No, Kyle," I said finally, my voice even and low. "Your actions ruined your life. This is the consequence." My refusal to fight back seemed to break him. The anger in his voice suddenly collapsed, replaced by a sound I had never heard from him before, pure, unadulterated panic. "Chloe, please," he whimpered, and the change was so abrupt it was jarring. "You have to stop this. You have to call them off. Call the insurance company. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. I'll pay you back for the car. I swear I'll get a job, a real one. I'll pay you $100 a month. Please, Chloe, don't do this to me. You can't let them do this to me." He was sobbing now, the desperate, ugly sobs of a child who had just realized that for the first time, no one was coming to save him. He was finally face to face with the monster of his own creation. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a sad, weary recognition. This was the moment he should have had years ago. I let him cry for a moment longer, and then I spoke, my voice devoid of anger or triumph. It was just a simple statement of fact. "This is what accountability feels like, Kyle," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself." And with that, I ended the call. I placed my phone down on the table, the silence in my apartment feeling profound. The dominoes had fallen. The game was over. And I had won not by being louder or angrier, but by simply demanding the truth. A week passed in relative silence. The storm on social media had died down, replaced by a quiet hum of support from the people who mattered. My parents had been sending me tentative, apologetic texts, which I had ignored. The legal machine of the insurance company was now grinding away, a separate entity, moving with its own unstoppable momentum. I was beginning to feel the first hints of peace, the sense that the worst was finally over. That's when Aunt Sharon called. Her voice on the phone was almost unrecognizable. The sharp, indignant tone was gone, replaced by a raw, broken rasp. She was crying deep, shuddering sobs that sounded torn from her soul. "Chloe," she wept, "please, I'm begging you. Can you please come over? Just one last time. Your uncle and I, we need to talk to you. We need to see you. Please don't shut us out completely." My first instinct was to say no. Every part of me screamed that it was a trap, another meticulously planned performance designed to wear me down and manipulate me into submission. But there was a new sound in her voice, a genuine desperation I hadn't heard before. And I realized that for me to truly move on, I needed to close this chapter completely. I needed one final definitive ending. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, my voice calm, and hung up before she could say another word. When I walked into their living room, the scene that greeted me was one of utter defeat. The house, usually so pristine and full of a boisterous, confident energy, felt like a tomb. Uncle Rick, a man I had only ever seen as proud and commanding, was slumped in his armchair looking 10 years older. Aunt Sharon sat on the sofa, her face pale and her eyes red and swollen. And sitting between them, looking small and broken, was Kyle. The arrogant smirk, the defiant anger, the panicked desperation, it was all gone. He just looked empty. He was the first to speak, his voice a barely audible mumble. "Chloe, I'm sorry," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I know I messed everything up. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix it. I'll get a job. I'll pay for everything, I swear." It was the apology I should have gotten at the very beginning. But hearing it now, it felt hollow, meaningless. It was the confession of a man who had finally been caught, not a man who was truly remorseful for his actions. I listened to him in silence, my expression unreadable. I let his pathetic words hang in the heavy air for a long moment. When it was clear he was finished, I didn't respond. I didn't yell or lecture or cry. Instead, I slowly took out my phone. The simple, deliberate action made all three of them flinch. I unlocked the screen, navigated to my banking app, and pulled up a specific transaction history. Without a word, I walked over and held the phone in front of my aunt and uncle. On the screen was a neat scrolling list of financial transactions from them to me over the past year. My aunt and uncle had been helping me with a down payment on a future home, sending me a few $100s every month. I had never asked for it, but they had insisted, a gesture of familial support I had once cherished. Then I swiped to a different screen. It was a series of screenshots Olivia had helped me get. They were from my uncle's own banking app showing his transactions to Kyle. Their eyes widened in confusion. They saw the list of payments they had been sending their son. $500 for apartment rent, $300 for monthly groceries, $250 for car insurance, a steady monthly bleed of their savings, all sent to their independent son, who was supposedly making his own way in the world. They looked up at me, their faces a canvas of bewilderment. They didn't understand what this had to do with anything. And that's when I delivered the final blow. My voice was not loud. It was quiet, cold, and devastatingly clear. "He doesn't have an apartment," I said. "He doesn't pay for his own groceries. He doesn't even have his own car insurance. He has been living in your basement rent-free, eating your food for the entire year you thought you were supporting his independence." I let the words sink in, watching as their confusion curdled into dawning horror. The car wasn't the beginning of his deception. I continued, my voice like ice. It was just the moment he finally got caught. For years he has been lying to your faces, treating your generosity and your trust like his own personal bank account. He has been bleeding you dry while pretending to be a man. I finally turned my gaze to Kyle, who was staring at me, his face ashen. "So when you sit here and you beg me to forgive him for the sake of this family," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I addressed my aunt and uncle again, "you need to ask yourselves a very serious question. Who is the one who has really been destroying it?" A small wounded sound escaped Aunt Sharon's lips. Uncle Rick just stared, the image of his successful independent son shattering into a million pieces right before his eyes. They weren't looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at a parasite. And in their eyes I saw the last wall of their denial, the final protective barrier they had built around their golden child, crumble into dust. 2 weeks after that final devastating confrontation, the last piece of my old life fell away. A certified letter arrived, and for a moment my heart seized, fearing it was another unforeseen problem. But it was from my insurance company. Inside was the final settlement check and a letter confirming that their subrogation case against Kyle was proceeding and that my involvement was officially concluded. Holding that check in my hand felt like holding a period at the end of a long, painful chapter. It was closure. The financial wound had been healed. Now it was time to heal the emotional ones. That evening, I sat on my sofa with my phone in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over their names. Aunt Sharon, Uncle Rick, Kyle. For years, their names on my phone had represented a complicated mix of obligation, frustration, and a deep, unfulfilled desire for their approval. Now they just represented a source of pain. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a quiet, resolute need to protect my own peace. With a steady hand, I blocked each of their numbers one by one. There was no ceremony, no final angry text, just a simple, silent act of self-preservation. It felt like turning a key in a lock, securing my life from any further intrusion. My parents were a different matter. The wounds there were deeper, more complicated. They hadn't been the aggressors, but their weakness, their desperate need for peace at any price had enabled the abuse. They had asked me to set myself on fire to keep the rest of the family warm. I knew I couldn't cut them out completely, but I also knew things could never go back to the way they were. I opened a new message and typed out the hardest words I had ever written. "Mom and Dad," it read, "I love you both, but I can't be a part of a family that asks me to sacrifice my own truth for a fake peace. I need time and space to heal. When you are ready to stand on the side of that truth without excuses or compromises, please call me. Until then, I can't." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message was an open door, but the path to it was now paved with principles they would have to choose to walk. The responsibility for our future relationship was now in their hands. With the final loose end tied up, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The next Saturday, I walked into a car dealership. But this time something was different. The last time I had bought a car, I was looking for a trophy. The Tesla was a symbol, a loud electric announcement to the world, and especially to my family that I had made it. It was beautiful and fast, but it was also flashy. It was a statement. And I now realized that its need for attention had been a vulnerability, a beacon that attracted my cousin's destructive envy. This time, I wasn't looking for a statement. I was looking for a sanctuary. I walked right past the sleek, low-profile sports cars and the brightly colored convertibles. My eyes landed on a vehicle in the corner of the showroom. It was a luxury hybrid SUV, a beautiful, deep charcoal gray. It was elegant but understated. It spoke of quiet confidence, not loud ambition. It was safe, reliable, and powerful in a way you felt, rather than heard. It was everything I now wanted to be. The entire process was different. I wasn't seeking validation from the salesperson. I knew what I wanted. I asked the right questions. I negotiated with a calm confidence. I was in complete control. An hour later, I was signing the paperwork. The salesperson handed me the keys, and the weight of them in my hand felt different. It wasn't the giddy thrill of a dream fulfilled. It was the solid, grounding feeling of a wise choice being made. I slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of clean leather and new beginnings. It was spacious, secure. A quiet hum came to life as I pressed the start button. I connected my phone, and instead of a high-energy playlist, I chose something calm and instrumental. As I pulled out of the dealership and onto the open road, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't smiling a wide, triumphant grin. She was smiling a small, peaceful smile, the kind that comes from deep within. The road stretched out before me under a clear blue sky. I wasn't driving away from something anymore. I was driving toward a future that was truly, completely my own. I had faced the storm and walked out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and finally, undeniably free. The Tesla had been my dream, but this quiet, steady movement forward, this was my reality. And it was so much better. True strength isn't about winning arguments. It's about enforcing boundaries. Sometimes the most profound act of love for yourself is knowing when to walk away from the people who refuse to respect you. Your peace is a price they can no longer afford to cost you.